I've been subscribed to Illumicrate for about 10 months now. Each month they send me a box with the book-related items and a beautiful hardback of a new release with an exclusive design. A few months ago, after gluttonously opening the then newly arrived book, and while sitting in the remains of it, I realized something. All I want is the feeling of surprise at what I'm gonna get. And after that, I couldn't care less. I don't care about the items. Most of them are useless to me and end up just being clutter. I mean, how many bookmarks can one need? I have like 4 in circulation and then the rest of them are existing in oblivion somewhere in my house. And the ones that I like and are useful, I probably already have in another version because I don't wait for a book box to get me the things that I need. And so I end up forgetting about them anyway, and they are doomed to gather dust indefinitely. And when it comes to the books, they're pretty, but I never feel like reading them. I mean, 9 out of 10 of them look like what I like to call a romance in disguise. And while there's nothing wrong with romance or reading it, most of the time I don't feel like reading romance. And so reading their synopsises always leaves me with a And so I stack them neatly on my bookshelves and promptly forget about them. Until today. I took the past 2 months to read all the books that I have received from Illumicrate, that is since October 2021, in order to answer the question we're all asking ourselves. Are Illumicrate books any good? I undertook this daunting task for 3 reasons. Number 1, shipping these to Bulgaria, where I currently live, isn't cheap. And I wanted to decide whether it's worth to continue sneezing up a chunk of precious cash each month. Number 2, I thought it would be interesting to me. People say don't judge a book by its cover, but what about judging a book by its synopsis? I read all the synopsises of these books prior to the experiment and promptly deemed 7 out of 10 to be absolutely uninteresting to me. But what if I'm wrong? And if yes, what is tripping me up? And if no, so much the better. And number 3, I think it could be interesting to you. Maybe you're considering subscribing to Illumicrate. Maybe you're suffering from the same terminal disinterest in the books you keep on paying for. Or maybe you're just curious. Whatever the reason that brought you here, it's nice to see you. How you doing? I have a stack of 10 books here in the order I received them. Iron Widow by Xiran Zhao from the Revenge is Sweeter box. Little Thieves by Margaret Owen from the Death and Fortune box. A Marvellous Light by Freya Marske from the Cursed box. This Woven Kingdom by Tahereh Mafi from Royal Secrets box. A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross from Bad Blood box. Gallant by V.E. Schwab or Victoria Schwab, which came with the A Life of Its Own box. A Portrait of a Thief by Grace D. Lee from Nothing But Thieves box. Book of Night by Holly Black from In the Dark box. We All Fall Down by Rose Szabo from Fight for Your Future box. And The Drowned Woods by Emily Lloyd-Jones from the Into Deep box. Enough foreplay? Let's begin. Iron Widow by Xiran Zhao. The boys of Huaxia dream of pairing up with girls to pilot giant transforming robots that can battle the mecha aliens that lurk beyond the Great Wall. It doesn't matter that the girls often die from the mental strain. When 18-year-old Zetian offers herself up as a concubine pilot, it's to assassinate the ace male pilot responsible for her sister's death. But she gets her vengeance in a way nobody expected. She kills him through the psychic link between pilots and emerges from the cockpit unscathed. She is labeled an Iron Widow, a much feared and much silenced kind of female pilot who can sacrifice boys to power up the robots instead. This is a young adult sci-fi novel and is the first book in the Iron Widow series. This edition is beautifully made, though it doesn't differ much from the original at a first glance. It has a bit of a stenciled edge here, a nice illustration on the back of the dust jacket, and a nice foiling on the naked hardback's front cover. We're gonna start with an unpopular opinion. Most people I hear talking about it have nothing but nice things to say. And if you read the Goodreads reviews, you'll see people falling over themselves praising this book. I disagree. I definitely didn't like it. I can't like a book about a young woman going on a murderous rampage. And that doesn't mean that I don't like books about revenge, but I think the execution of this one was definitely lacking. Let's begin here. Extremely unlikable main character and no character development. She went through struggles, but learned nothing besides, I'm more awesome than anybody else. She was selfish, vindictive, and so not like other girls. Let me ask you this. If you met a person like this, would you like to hang out with them? The answer for me is no, and I also wouldn't want to read a book about somebody like that. One thing became clear the more I read this book is that the author had a message and then they haphazardly dressed it up in a story. And unfortunately, I think they sacrificed every other aspect of this book in order to pound this message into the reader's head over and over again. And that message, in my opinion, is as follows. Women, dumb and oppressed, unless they're the main character. Men, evil and oppressive, unless they're cute and sleeping with the main character. Forgiveness is a mistake, and women can only be strong if they're ruthless psychopaths. And while I can understand how a book can benefit from having some of the characters represent this model, building an entire society with placeholder, oppressed, ignorant women and evil scheming men is frankly boring to read about. The message of the book was too one-dimensional and left no room for nuance. Pretty much no situation in life is a clash of total good versus total bad, and building a society on such a rigid good-bad framework robs the story of believability. At times I felt like I was reading a middle-grade book written with grown-up words and more gore. I also can't enjoy a book where there's so many characters and not a single meaningful friendship. And before you mention it, relationships that are romantic in nature don't count. And by the way, the romance, staler than a piece of 3-day-old toast. These two dudes were like cardboard cutouts and more of a background to the main character than any sort of partners. And it's truly a shame because the setting could have been so interesting, albeit not entirely original. And I just recently found out that the author is actually a creator here on YouTube when one of their videos popped up in my recommendations. I checked it out and I liked it. I think they are quite charismatic, and I wish I could have liked their book too, but I didn't. I was either bored or annoyed pretty much the whole time. I will have to rate this one a miss. Little Thieves by Margaret Owen. Once upon a time, there was a horrible girl. Vanya Schmidt knows that no gift is freely given, not even a mother's love, and she's on the hook for one hell of a debt. Vanya, the adopted goddaughter of Death and Fortune, was Princess Giselle's dutiful servant up until a year ago. That was when Vanya's otherworldly mothers demanded a terrible price for their care, and Vanya decided to steal her future back by stealing Giselle's life for herself. The book is a young adult fantasy retelling of Goose Girl or something, I'm not sure. It's also the first book in the Little Thieves duology. This is a beautiful special edition. From what I can see, the background color of the dust jacket is deeper and darker than the original. It has beautiful sprayed and stenciled edges. And the naked hardback is actually illustrated quite nicely. It also comes with a signed book plate. The premise of this book is quite unique, and I have to be honest, initially I wasn't too sure about it. Following morally corrupt protagonists can be a hit or a miss, and it's often a miss. However, Margaret Owen proved me wrong. I have never read anything by her before, and I didn't know her as an author, though I do own the Merciful Crow duology after a stellar recommendation from a friend. This book is well written, with some pretty interesting main and supporting characters, some of which are quite quirky, a soft magic system, and a one-dimensional villain. Which I didn't mind because she made him vile enough for me to really look forward to his demise. One thing I liked very much was how the backstory was revealed. The book is split into sections, and each section starts with a little tale from the past. This edition also contains an illustration for each of those tales. I don't know if the original one also has them. There was only one thing I didn't quite like, and that was that there were a few conveniences that kind of reduced the stakes. Overall, I liked it. I'd rate it a hit. I can't live like this. It's 1,000 degrees here. A Marvellous Light by Freya Marske. Robin Blythe has more than enough bother in his life. He's struggling to be a good older brother, a responsible employer, and the harried baronet of a seat gutted by his late parents' excesses. When an administrative mistake sees him named the civil service liaison to a hidden magical society, he discovers what's been operating beneath an extraordinary reality he's always known. Now Robin must contend with the beauty and danger of magic, an excruciating deadly curse, and the alarming visions of the future that came with it. Not to mention Edwin Corsi, his cold and prickly counterpart in the magical bureaucracy, who clearly wishes Robin were anyone and anywhere else. This is an adult LGBT Edwardian fantasy romance that reads a little bit like a historical fiction. It's also the first book in the Last Binding series. The special edition is very unusual, with beautiful sprayed and stenciled edges, an illustrated naked hardback, and a plastic dust jacket, which I don't know how I feel about. The edition is also signed by the author. I will differ from the majority opinion here again, as most people seem to love it, and I DNF'd it at 40-something%. I tried, I really did, but this book nearly put me in a reading slump. It It was slow, painfully slow. It started promising with the death of some guy, and then nothing happened, and then nothing happened some more. There were no stakes to be found the whole time, and we were just following the main characters around while they were doing mundane, nobody cares things. And talking about the main characters, we are following 2 points of view, and I have to be honest, often I couldn't tell them apart. Though they were meant to be very different from each other, they just weren't. Both Edmund and Robin, and all the supporting characters for that matter, were as bland as boiled egg whites. I felt like I was reading a book about cardboard cutouts. And it's such a shame because the setting seemed very interesting in the beginning, but it was such a struggle to read, and often I found myself stopping and being distracted. As I already mentioned, most people seem to like it, and I didn't finish it, so who knows, but I will rate it a miss. This Woven Kingdom by Tahereh Mafi. To all the world, Aliza is a disposable servant, not the long-lost heir to an ancient Jinn kingdom forced to hide in plain sight. The Crown Prince Kamran has heard the prophecies foretelling the death of his king, but he could never have imagined that the serving girl with the strange eyes, the girl he can't put out of his mind, would one day soon uproot his kingdom and the world. So this is a young adult fantasy romance inspired by Middle Eastern mythology and is the first book in this Woven Kingdom series. It's one of the most gorgeous special editions out there. It's a dark navy naked hardback with beautiful patterns and gold and silver foil and matching sprayed and stenciled edges. I love this design. The book came signed alongside a beautiful print with a letter from the author on its back. I also love the book itself. It's one of the few I thought I might like upon reading the synopsis because I have a soft spot for Middle Eastern mythology, or any mythology for that matter. The book features dual perspectives, one from the female protagonist's point of view and one from the male's. I quite like the female protagonist. In fact, I think she's one of my favorite young adult female protagonists out there. She had dignity, empathy, and brain. She was easy to like and root for without being bland. The male protagonist and main love interest, on the other hand, was a little bit more surface level, but he compensated for that with a very interesting grandfather and advisor. I liked the world building, though it did lack a bit in depth. And the story was dynamic and I quite liked it. The one thing that I didn't like very much was the ending, as it felt a bit rushed. But as it's the first book in a duology, I'm hoping that the second one will compensate for it a bit. All in all, a very nice read. I count it as a hit. A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross. Jack Tamerlane hasn't stepped foot on Cadence in 10 long years, content to study music at the mainland university. But when young girls start disappearing from the Isle, Jack is summoned home to help find them. Enchantments run deep in Cadence. Gossip is carried by the wind. Play shawls can be as strong as armor, and the smallest cut of a knife can instill fathomless fear. The capricious spirits that rule the Isle by fire, water, earth, and wind find mirth in the lives of the humans who call the land home. Adira, heiress of the East and Jack's childhood enemy, knows the spirits' only answer to a bard's music, and she hopes Jack can draw them forth by song, enticing them to return the missing girls. This is a young adult fantasy novel with a bit of romance based on Scottish lore and is the first book in the Elements of Cadence duology. The special edition comes with a very beautiful design on the dust jacket and even more beautiful foiled naked hardback, completed with illustrated end pages and sprayed and stenciled edges. The book is also signed by the author. I don't know what to think about this one, honestly. It started quite promising with great atmosphere and mystery, but the more it went, the more convoluted and confused it got. Mostly because the magic system is so soft that it just didn't make sense at times. And to be honest, to this day, I'm not sure whose story was trying to tell and why. In the end, I was left with the impression that the author was trying to shoot more for atmosphere than for actual plot. Not to mention that the romance was so damn stale, there was no chemistry at all. And I'm not necessarily saying that it's a bad book. As I already mentioned, the author knows how to create a very nice atmosphere and her writing style is quite beautiful. She managed to create a nice mystery, but didn't manage to resolve it in the most satisfying way. I gave the book 3 stars on Goodreads and I was struggling to rate it here, to the point where I was actually considering making it neutral. But when I thought back to it, I felt zero excitement and I have no intention to pick up the second book in the series. Just the thought of it makes me want to yawn. So sadly, I will have to rate this one a reluctant miss. Gallant by V.E. Schwab. Olivia Pryor has grown up in Maryland's school for girls, and all she has of her past is her mother's journal, which seems to unravel into madness. Then, a letter invites Olivia to come home, to Gallant. Yet when Olivia arrives, no one is expecting her, but Olivia is not about to leave the first place that feels like home. It doesn't matter if her cousin Matthew is hostile or if she sees half-formed ghouls haunting the hallways. By the way, there's more to the synopsis, but I advise you not to read it all because, in my opinion, it spoils some of the experience. Going into it more or less blind makes the mystery more vivid. This is a young adult fantasy/horror novel. The hardback comes with a special dust jacket design, a beautiful white naked hardback with red foiling on the spine and front cover, and gorgeous stenciled edges. The book also features very nice end pages and some quite disturbing illustrations. I love it, though I have to be honest, I like the standard hardcover and the Forbidden Planet one a little better. This book was phenomenal and is my favorite one from all of the ones that I read. It's coincidentally the only one that doesn't have romance, so. The atmosphere was great, the mystery was great, the characters were great, the writing was beautiful and vivid, and the book even managed to make me emotional a few times. The ending was so bleak and beautiful, I just loved this book. Oh, and the formatting was phenomenal. The way the villain POV entries were represented was so cool. And speaking of the villain, that was the one thing that was slightly lacking in my opinion. I wish their introduction had been done a little bit earlier in the book and they have been a bit more developed. Not that it was bad necessarily, but it needed more in my opinion. Regardless, this is a lovely story and I count it as an absolute hit. Well done with it, Illumicrate. Portrait of a Thief by Grace D. Lee. History is told by the conquerors. Across the Western world, museums display the spoils of war, of conquest, of colonialism. Priceless pieces of art looted from the countries kept even now. Will Chen plans to steal them back. A senior in Harvard, Will fits comfortably in his carefully curated roles. A perfect student, an art history major, and sometimes artist. The eldest son who has always been his parents' American dream. But when a mysterious Chinese benefactor reaches out with an impossible and illegal job, Will finds himself something else as well, the leader of a heist to steal back 5 priceless Chinese sculptures looted from Beijing centuries ago. This is a standalone adult contemporary mystery from what I can tell. The special edition's dust jacket cover slightly differs in its design from the original, which I think is a nice touch. Additionally, there is an illustration on the back of it, and the naked hardback has some nice foiling on the spine and the front cover. The book also came signed by the author. I DNF'd this pretty much immediately. Now here's the thing, I don't think it's bad. At least I don't know that it's bad, but I read the first 2 chapters and I just couldn't care. I don't like contemporary fiction and I'm not that much into heist either, so the combination of the two made me never want to read a book again. So in order to avoid an impending reading slump, I opted not to finish this one, at least not for now. Who knows how I'm gonna feel in the future. I just couldn't. So for the sake of fairness, since I DNF'd it so early, I will refrain from rating it either hit or miss. Book of Night by Holly Black. In Charlie Hall's world, shadows can be altered for entertainment and cosmetic preferences, but also to increase power and influence. You can alter someone's feelings and memories, but manipulating shadows has a cost, with the potential to take hours or days from your life. Your shadow holds all the parts of you that you want to keep hidden, a second self standing just to your left, walking behind you into lit rooms. And sometimes it has a life of its own. This is Holly Black's first adult novel, to my knowledge, and is an urban fantasy/mystery. The special edition is quite beautiful, with a predominantly white dust jacket, sprayed edges, beautiful end pages, and a lovely foiled naked hardback. The book is fairly short, only a few pages over 300, and was initially announced as a standalone. Well, recently it was announced as Book 1 in the Book of Night series, which given the book's ending is not entirely surprising, but I'm getting ahead of myself. If I had to describe this book with one word, it would be depression. Everything was so bleak. And I wouldn't call that a bad thing. The author had a mood and she wanted to represent it, which she managed to do quite well. I eventually got into it, but the beginning was a bit rough. It didn't help that the main character isn't strictly likable to begin with. And though neither changed much throughout the book, I managed to enjoy the read. I read a few reviews on Goodreads, and some people were rating it low because they didn't find much story to follow. I somewhat agree. A lot of the time, the book felt like a slice of life meandering, but I still find it rather enjoyable. I read it within a day, which speaks for itself. I managed to guess the twist fairly early in the book, but it didn't ruin my enjoyment. I only guessed it because that's how I would have wanted to be written. And I really liked the ending. It was dark and slightly unexpected until they announced the sequel. And then I was slightly pissed because I was baited into reading a standalone with a bold ending, only to find out that I read book 1 in a series with a rather standard ending. I don't like it when they do that. Regardless, it was a nice read, and I'm gonna count it as a hit. We All Fall Down by Szabo. In River City, where magic used to thrive and is now fading, the witches who once ruled the city along with their powerful king have become all but obsolete. The city's crumbling government is now controlled primarily by the new university and teaching hospital, which has grown to take over half of the city. Moving between the decaying old city and the ruthless new, 4 young queer people struggle with the daily hazards of life: work, school, dodging ruthless cops, and unscrupulous scientists, not realizing that they have been selected to play in an age-old drama that revives the flow of magic through the world. When a mysterious death rocks their fragile peace, the 4 are brought into each other's orbits as they uncover a deeper magical conspiracy. This is a young adult queer fantasy and the first book in the River City duology. I don't have my copy here because my order got displaced and I'm still waiting for the replacement, so I read it on Kindle. From what I can see on the internet, the cover of the special edition is slightly darker. I really like the original cover to begin with, so I really don't mind. And there appear to be beautiful stenciled edges. This was bad. It started well with an interesting premise, and then it became utterly chaotic. It was very difficult from the descriptions to understand the environment and even the time period that we were trying to follow. The characters weren't well developed, and while there were a few interesting twists at the end, there was no coherent plot to follow pretty much throughout the entire book. There were quite a few queer characters, and while I think that's good, I think they could have been done better. Now, as far as I'm aware, the author is non-binary themselves, and I am obviously no expert, but I don't think I should be in order to enjoy the book. I had such a hard time deciphering the pronouns because they were never clarified. I would have appreciated to be given the chance to know who we are addressing. Let me know who these pronouns belong to prior so that I can follow. I understand that it's a sensitive topic, but it was very confusing to see pronouns being exchanged continuously without being clarified prior who they belong to. I was struggling so much and I had to really push myself to finish this book by sheer force of will. Now, before I began reading this book, I didn't check synopsis or ratings, so after I was done, I went to Goodreads to see whether I was missing something. And that's when I saw this. I think this is the lowest rated book I have ever read. Though to be fair, it's nowhere near the worst. I checked some of the reviews and I saw that a lot of people had the same issue as I had and some additional other ones. I advise you to go check them for yourself if you feel so inclined. So unfortunately, I will have to rate this one a miss. The Drowned Woods by Emily Lloyd-Jones. Once upon a time, the kingdoms of Wales were rife with magic and conflict. An 18-year-old Mererid Mare is well acquainted with both. She is the last living water diviner and has spent years running from the prince who bound her into his service. Under the prince's orders, she located the wells of the enemies and he poisoned them without her knowledge, causing hundreds of deaths. After discovering what he had done, Mare went to great lengths to disappear from his reach. Then Mare's old handler returns with a proposition: use her powers to bring down the very prince that abused them both. This is a standalone young adult fantasy based on Welsh mythology and isn't out yet technically. It should be out within a week or so. This edition comes with a special designed dust jacket with some nice texture on it and art print on the back of it. The book also has a lovely hardback cover with some gorgeous foiling and sprayed and stenciled edges, and it's signed by the author. I gotta say, it's a very pretty signature. I really like this cover. It relaxes me to look at it. Unfortunately, this book was very underwhelming. Everything was surface level with inconsistent and undeveloped characters. Up until the 50-60% mark, I thought it was aggressively average, and then it became just stupid. The reason for one particular betrayal was utterly nonsensical because the cost of the betrayal was higher than the benefit of it. The plot didn't make any sense. The more was revealed, the less it seemed like a well thought out story, and the more like random pieces of lore awkwardly stitched together. Like, this was the worst heist I have ever read about. Half of the people didn't even need to be there. The world didn't make any sense. Like, exactly what kind of power is being had by whom and is being used how, and why isn't it being used in the proper way? There were moments where a character who has magic is using it as the dumbest, most convoluted way possible, which hinders them, while we have seen them prior to it use it in a better way. And by the way, we've seen them after that use it in a better way again. It felt like the author didn't read her own book. The writing style was rather unimpressive, and I even managed to find a few typos, more so towards the end of the book. On top of that, there was a ton of exposition, and the author did this thing that I hate, where a character would make a revelation and then repeat it on the very next page, word for word, in front of more characters. I mean, why do that? And new things were thrown into the mix out of the blue at late stages of the story, which is really annoying. It's one thing to reveal a well-foreshadowed information, it's a completely different thing to invent new stuff at 80% of the book because you've written yourself into a corner. I seriously wanted to DNF this book at like 85% of it, and it's not that it's the worst book out there, it's just that it felt like a waste of time. I sadly must rank this a miss. So, are Illumicrate books any good? The answer is not always, and not to all readers. Will I continue my subscription? I honestly don't know. They got me a little bit with the waiting list and the exclusivity of the membership. It feels a little bit like giving up to end it, which I realize is utterly irrational, but we all have our flaws and irrationality isn't even my worst one. But here's what I'll do. I will give it 2 more months, exactly 2 more books to make a full year, and if I don't like those 2, I will give up on it. Expect my video about that in the not so distant future. And that concludes this video. What a lukewarm conclusion it is. I hope it was useful and that you enjoyed it. I sure didn't. Let me know what you thought about the books, my opinions, and as always, my terrible hair. We could debate or commiserate. About my hair, that is, my opinions on books are always absolute. See you soon, and I wish you all floppy paperbacks. And as soon as I'm done with filming, this is what they do. Did you know that if you like this video and subscribe to this channel, you will live longer and therefore be able to read more books?